But what I found out in the history of origins and Livingstone's history is that actually origins is caught up with my own concerns about race and justice in a fallen world.
Our next response is from Josh Swamidass, Associate Professor of Pathology and Immunology and Biomedical Engineering at Washington University in St. Louis. Josh, looking forward to hearing from what you have to say on the subject.
Yeah, thanks for having me. And I have to say that if you've not yet read Adam's Ancestors, I highly recommend it. It's probably one of the most important books on origins I've read. And that's not flattery. I really think it's a book that really needs to be picked up now if you haven't. I think the reason why it's been so important for me is that it really undoes an immense number of false assumptions on which a lot of conflict really currently depends. And towards greater ends, I'm one of these scientists that's actually a person in the real world. I'm a dark-skinned Indian in St. Louis, not that far from that place with the racist books where I'm living. And, origins often really seems like this internecine debate that's very esoteric, having to do a lot of Western thinkers going back and forth. But what I found out in the history of origins and Livingstone's history is that actually origins is caught up with my own concerns about race and justice in a fallen world. Really, origins is how we struggled to make sense of the unity and diversity of humankind for a very long time. And, in that context, I want to point out that for centuries, the church stood against racist theories of origins with a confession of monogenesis, that we all descend from Adam and Eve. And for centuries, scientists' objectives. And now, and I think this is important, and it's a really epic twist, it turns out that for a long time, some theologians would really abandon monogenesis because of that, others would reject evolution, but now, evolutionary science, in some really critical ways that are fairly recent, really vindicates the doctrine of monogenesis. And I think that's important because how it ties into these larger questions about race. Now, there's these questions I just want to point to that are going to really guide my reading of both history and where the science currently is. I think the core questions for theology are, do we descend from Adam and Eve? Do we all descend from Adam and Eve? Two, from a scientific point of view, it turns out that that's not actually the most important question. The much more important question is, did their lineage interbreed with others? And then three, underlying all of this, and the reason why it becomes important, is these deeper questions about what it means to be human. And these are very theologically important, politically important, scientifically important. This is really the grand question, which we should really not really accept simple answers. We should know it's a little more complicated. So here's my reading of this. I really think the Genesis account is simple in many ways. It talks about Adam and Eve and all humans come from us, but there's a lot of questions that are there in the story, a lot of mystery. I think the real big challenge to the Genesis account wasn't from evolution. It was really from the discovery of Antipodeans about 500 years ago, where we realized that there's people on this other continent. Really, Columbus sailed the ocean blue in 1492, and that's the real theological problem that Pierre is dealing with. Not the existence of a continent over there, but the fact that there were people on that continent, and there was really no conceivable way to understand how they could have descended from Adam and Eve. And so it's really important to understand that polygenesis that he proposes is really targeted at that very contemporary theological, political, geographic problem. And this is where he proposes the idea, which actually seemed quite self-evident to most people, is that these people over there, they just don't descend from Adam and Eve. In response, most of the church just rejected this, and this is really where the doctrine of monogenesis is really formed. And I think people misunderstand it to be a statement about the past, but it's really a statement about the present. It's saying that everyone alive today descends from Adam and Eve. Those co-Adamites out there, they don't exist. And so pre-Adamites are not a valid explanation for co-Adamites because co-Adamites don't exist. So in historical context, I think the confession of monogenesis intends to reject the premise that some people in present day do not descend from Adam and Eve. Of course, polygenesis was taken up by scientists and colonialists anyways, and metastasized into racist forms. And of course, monogenesis theories of origins can be just as racist. But in the confession of monogenesis, the church found its voice against many racist theories of origins. And what about the primordial past? In many ways, monogenesis actually accentuated those questions and really raised questions of how it could be. Now, where does the science stand on this? I would say that monogenesis is actually a very audacious claim about the world that had no scientific support. It's about as ridiculous in our moment as claiming that a population of Homo sapiens on Mars descend from Adam and Eve. There was not really any clear understanding of how it could be possible, yet that's really where theologians came down. And most science really through the ages has said no. But there's actually been a very large change in our understanding of that. I'm pointing to 3 books here. One of them is by me, but there's also Steve Olson's book from 2003 and also David Reich's book from 2019, which I think are all extremely important in this conversation. What we basically found is that humanity is far more connected than we had first imagined. Even the Americas were not isolated the way that we imagined. There's been long-term exchange across these places. And so it turns out, actually, that if Adam and Eve were real people in a real past, they'd most likely be ancestors of all of us. And that's true even if they lived just 6,000 years ago. Everyone across the globe would still descend by them by AD 1. We can't trace Adam's lineage, to be clear, with genetic evidence because it would still most likely be genealogical ancestors of everyone that leave us no DNA. They'd be genetic ghosts. The only catch is that in the primordial past, Adam and Eve's lineage would have had to interbred with others. But as I've already mentioned, that's not actually what monogenesis is about. That's an open question, a lacuna in the count that a lot of people wonder about for a long time before evolution as well. So I think biologos and evolutionary creationists are a really helpful dialogue partner in this because they really, really don't like monogenesis and have been working hard to argue against it for a while. And that'll give a clarity on kind of where the scientific status of this stands. The argument they made for a very long time was that the genetic evidence demonstrates our ancestral population was never less than 10,000 for the last 18 million years. Therefore, we do not descend from Adam and Eve. The first point I want to make about it is that this first claim turns out to be false. That's just not true. And I'd point you to William Lane Craig's new book on this, where he really does a phenomenal job on the science and really explaining exactly what they got wrong in the science here. But even if we grant that that's true, a key point, and this really goes to my book, The Genealogical Adam and Eve, is that the second part doesn't follow. Even if it's true that our ancestral population never dipped below 10,000, that doesn't mean that we do not all descend from Adam and Eve. Here you can see a population that is always large, and then there's a couple from whom everyone descends. And it turns out our best estimates say that it just takes about 4,000 years or so before a person in the past would become an ancestor of everyone. That's really fast, just 4,000 years. Just recently, they published a new revised version of this argument. The target's still monogenesis. What's really striking about this review of what genetics says about Adam and Eve is that it makes no mention that Adam and Eve would be ancestors of all of us. I won't get into all the details here, but we can say that that the first claim is nearly true. But the more fundamental thing, I would say, is how theological the second part is. And because of that, it doesn't really follow. And what they're doing here is using language and really tight use of language to direct attention to a very esoteric idea in population genetics, the esoteric single couple bottleneck. But if you look here, and you can see a bottleneck couple and a headwater couple, which couple is most important? Which couple is unique? Well, the fact of the matter is they're unique for different ways, and they're important for different ways. I think David Livingstone's reading of Augustine is correct. Augustine basically defines human as Adam and Eve and their descendants. And by that definition, we can understand the black dots here as people who are the descendants of Adam and Eve, the headwater couple. And the really critical progenitor couple, the sole and unique progenitors of all humanity, is actually the headwater couple, not the bottleneck couple. What's going on here is they're trying to use science as a way to make a theological claim with certainty that they really can't sustain. So I think what we're finding, though, when we actually look at a closer view of what evolutionary science has really come to, especially over the last 10 years, it's something that actually looks very close to the Genesis account. Humans are not different types. We are really one race. And Adam and Eve, if they really exist, we all descend from them. You know, the history of origins, I think, is really critical because it unscrews a ton of false assumptions about monogenesis, the tradition, and also what really are the currents that are driving this. But I do think there's a payoff. I think origins, once again, can really bring us back to these grand questions of what it means to be human. We can engage the difficult questions of race and justice in a fallen world here. And in our moment, I really do see opportunity in recovering the doctrine of monogenesis. And in doing so, we might recover our theological voice on race. If Adam and Eve are real, then we really are bound together as their sons and daughters. And we can proclaim anew this truth, this time with scientists too, that we are one blood, one family, far more connected than it might first seem. we are one race, the human race. Thanks a lot.